Dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am Mike Liu, Vice President and Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. On behalf of CCG, I would like to extend our warmest welcome to our distinguished speakers, friends from media, to join CCG Global Dialogue Series. China, Papua, New Guinea, and the Pacific Island Cooperation for Sustainable 21st Century. China and the Pacific Island countries enjoy long-lasting friendly exchange and cooperation since establishment of diplomatic ties in the 1970s. China-PRC relations have entered a new stage of rapid growth in the recent years. Pacific Island countries as important economic and trade partners of China, Chinese direct investment in PRC countries have reached $2.7 billion by end of 2021. China and Papua New Guinea has enjoyed a deepening economic relationship. During a meeting with the Prime Minister of PNG, His Excellency James McGriff, in November 2022, President Xi Jinping pointed out that China and the PNG as good friends, good partners, and good brothers, has set a fine example of solidarity, collaboration, and win-win cooperation between developing countries. It is our greatest honor to welcome His Excellency Peter O'Neill, former Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, to CCG Global Dialogue Series. His Excellency Peter O'Neill is the 9th Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, starting in 2012. He is a member of Parliament for Nadipu, Pankia Open, and the leader of People's National Congress Party. His Excellency Peter O'Neill has a very distinguished career in government responsible for public service, commerce, finance, science, technology, and higher education. Without any further ado, let's welcome His Excellency Peter O'Neill to the podium.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting me here today and also inviting me to this Center for China Globalization in Beijing, and of course the series of dialogue that's going to take place over the next few days. I'm greatly honored to be here. And of course, let me thank Ms. Ann Tang, Vice President of CCG, and of course, Mike Liu, who's Senior Fellow, and rest of the staff for a excellent welcome extended to me and my small delegation we are here today. But first, let me say that China has been a great friend of Papua New Guinea for many, many years. Papua New Guinea got independence in 1975. I think China was one of the first countries that we established diplomatic relations with. So over close to 50 years ago, we saw the great opportunity that this relationship presented to us. It was largely also because we have had some strong, very close relationship before for many of the settlers who migrated to our country from China. I think close to 200 years ago, some of the first settlers, Chinese settlers, settled in our country. Many of them continue to play leading roles in our country in business, in politics, and in communities. And many of them are now third or fourth generation Papua New Guineans who love our country and, of course, still believe in the greatness of China. Papua New Guinea's development experience has been somewhat very challenging because, like many Pacific Island countries, we are very small in the global terms, but Papua New Guinea is by far the biggest country in the Pacific, close to 17 million population, compared to many of our other smaller Pacific Island countries. We are quite a large country in terms of the Pacific. But with that large population, it comes with a lot of challenges because many of our population live in rural communities, just like China was some 50 years ago. Many of your population lived in the rural communities, and China's ability to bring that population to a middle class income earning population to a better standard of living is something that Papua New Guinea has been aspiring to also lead into that kind of example and follow. But because of ours is a very different style of government, we are democratically parliamentary elected government where governments continue to change. As many of you know, when leaders change, the policies of government change. And some are good policies, some do not quite match up to the expectations of our people. So it has been a huge challenge. And as a result, we have a situation where we have a huge population of young people. Just under 60% of our population is age of 25 years old. Most of them are not well educated. So when governments like mine were in government, we had free education policy where every child was supposed to be able to go to school without the parents who are very low income and in people who are unable to afford school fees. We were able to translate that, and we increased the enrollment by well over 100%. As a result, we had close to 2.5 million young people in schools right throughout the country. That program has led to a high literacy level, improvement in the literacy level within the country. Health and education is a strong foundation for the social well-being of any country's population. And I think investments in those areas have got to create a good and huge opportunities for each individual family and each individual community and, of course, person. The leadership challenge in Papua New Guinea today is how to address the huge lack of opportunities that young people have in our country. And China has been a great partner. Over the last 20 years of a relationship between Papua New Guinea, which has been quite strong, I've been part of a government that has been very progressive. Prior to my government, it was a government led by our founding father, Somare. His policies and my policies were mainly aligned towards emulating what China has been doing over the many, many years. Ours has been trying to get the rural communities. As China has experienced, we also have similar, even though in a smaller scale, the migration of young people from rural communities into the cities, looking for better opportunities. And trying to provide for that migration has been challenging because of lack of infrastructure. Not enough schools, not enough education services, not enough infrastructure. So over the last 20 years, China has been a huge investor in PNG by providing access to finance, providing access to the experience of many of their contractors who were able to build infrastructure for us. So we've had an opportunity to build many schools, many hospitals, many roads, many airports, and infrastructure that is changing the lives of individual families and individuals right throughout the country. PNG is a very resource-rich country. It's not poor, but it's lacking in capital to develop in those resources. and getting the right partners to come in and participate in the development of those resources. And on our part is to making sure that those investors know the rules of engagement in our country, and that policies do not change on a regular basis where it is detrimental to the investors. So is a lacking of foreign direct investment, and China is now starting to become the largest investor in our country. You will see in many parts of our cities and towns throughout in our country, many of the Chinese businessmen are fairly well located in each of these communities, actively participating in the day-to-day lives of our people, both in business and politics, and of course in the community affairs. So I think that Papua New Guinea's challenges are that we must continue to stay away from the issues that are running around with the geopolitics of our region. Countries like the Pacific, especially the smaller countries, they have no ability to advance the course of the geopolitics that we have, the debates that are going on. This is about improving the lives of the individual population that each country has. But unfortunately, we get dragged into it. And over the last 48 years or so, over the relationship between PNG and PNG and China, we have always had this policy of maintaining a very strong link with China itself. And I think that the future is bright for both countries. I know that as a nation, Papua New Guinea's population is growing. It's going to be it will, within the next decade or so, it will bypass Australian population, because Australia's lack of migration and the numbers of migration going into Australia is not as high as it used to be. So, and then of course, the families having lesser and lesser children. As a result, their population is not growing at the same level as Papua New Guinean population is growing. So it will become a very important country in terms of the population, the size of the economy. The last 20 years or so, our GDP has been doubling. Our economic growth has been just following China between 5 and 8% generally over the last 20 years, except of course during the COVID period and the years after that. But there's a great opportunity for us to continue to strengthen the relationship that between the two countries that we have. And I think that the discussions that are going on, as I said earlier, about the issues around the security arrangements and defense cooperation arrangements that are been discussed in the region, my views has been very public and very upfront, that Pacific Island countries should stay clear of those discussions. We should focus on economic and trade and people-to-people relationship. That's where it matters most. And we know of China's great achievements over the last 40 or so years, where you were able to move, as I said earlier, hundreds of millions of people. In our human history, nothing of that has ever happened before. And China needs to be very proud of its achievements, that you are able to move over 300 or 400 million people from low base income level to a middle income situation, which is really lifted the standard of living for your people. That is the experience that countries like Papua New Guinea need. We are not really interested in issues of security arrangements. We are not in any conflict with anyone. I think the Pacific is big enough for a lot of everyone. I think you will find that both China and many of the other players in this debate are all living within the Pacific. It's up to us to protect the Pacific. There are greater challenges before us, like climate change, and of course, the population growth that many of the other countries within the region, especially the Asia-Pacific region, are facing that needs our immediate attention. And I think those are focuses that we should be focusing on. But all in all, I think we have a very healthy relationship between PNG and China. We were very honored to welcome President Xi Jinping in 2018 when we hosted the APEC meeting in Papua New Guinea. He's a great friend of Papua New Guinea. I've had an opportunity to meet and engage with him almost 14 times in 8 years. So, for us in the Pacific, you don't get that opportunity to meet your leader at that kind of engagement. It has been a great exposure for Papua New Guinea. And that has given us a lot of encouraging outcomes where we're able to see the sort of development that PNG has been able to achieve. So once again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here with you and spend a few minutes talking about my country to you young people and, of course, our distinguished friends from the CCG. And it's a great honor to be here. I'm hoping that when I get back, I'll get some of our young people who are really engaged in meaningful discussions and debates about the future of our world and, of course, future of our region within the Pacific and Asia-Pacific region especially. I'm hoping that I can be able to refer them to you so you can continue to dialogue with them and give your experience and see how they can mitigate some of the challenges that they have in their communities and in their families. Once again, thank you very much, and thank you for hosting me here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for what maybe you can. Thank you so much for His Excellency Peter O'Neill's very inspirational talk. Let's proceed to the fireside chat. So maybe let me take a few minutes to briefly introduce our moderator, David Morris, who has been an outstanding global career as an Australian and multinational diplomat, senior advisor to government, business, university, and the United Nations. He is a vice chair of UNESCAP, United Nations Economic and the Social Commission for Asia Pacific, Sustainable Business Network, and non-residential senior fellow of CCG. David is also recipient of 2022 Outstanding Asia Business Leader Lifetime Achievement Award. Let's warmly welcome David to join the fireside chat. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Peter O'Neill, for such an interesting introduction. You've already addressed some of the issues I was going to ask you about, but we have a big theme. We have China, Papua New Guinea, and the Pacific Islands, and these questions about a sustainable future in the 21st century. So we'll try in our limited time to touch upon all of those issues, and I'll try and watch my clock as we do that. And I will kick off with some questions, and then there'll be an opportunity for everybody in the audience who'd like to ask a question. So please prepare your questions and be ready. But let me start. We have a unique opportunity, really, in Beijing of having a former Prime Minister from Papua New Guinea here with us, and an opportunity to ask questions. And I was going to ask you, Peter, about the challenges of development for a country like Papua New Guinea, and you've really addressed them very well in your opening comments. And so I thought actually we have an opportunity today to introduce to the audience who haven't had the opportunity, as I have, to visit Papua New Guinea. I've enjoyed visiting there about a dozen times, I think. And one of the things I have to say to those who haven't had that privilege is it's such an interesting place because it's so culturally diverse. This is a country of 800 different language groups, incredible cultural traditions. And so I thought we might take the opportunity to ask you just to introduce to us the cultures of Papua New Guinea, and in particular, why is this relevant to China? Well, one one element that I would think is very relevant if you're a Chinese investor would be to understand customary land ownership and some of those traditional cultural questions. So over to you on culture first.
Thank you, David. Yes, well, Papua New Guinea, as I was saying, is quite a large country in the Pacific. It's in half of the island of New Guinea, which we call it, well, Papua, which on the other side is under the governance of Indonesia, and on our side is Papua New Guinea is and a country of its own. But we have the same traditions, same ethnic grouping. Within that ethnic grouping, I think on the other side, we've got about 13 million people. On our side, we've got about 17 million people. So you're talking about 30 million people on one island. 30 million people with some of the largest resources in the world, both gold, copper, gas, and oil, both been developed in stages at the moment. But culturally, we speak, in Papua New Guinea, we speak 800 completely different languages and over 1,000 different tribes. On the other side, there are close to about 300, from what I'm told, 300 different languages. So on one island of 30 million people, you got almost over 1,100 different languages spoken. So one probably language be spoken by 150 to 200,000 people, completely distinct from the other tribes. So it's quite a diverse country. And when you go and visit each of these villages, you will see the dances and cultural dressings are completely different from each other. It's because most of this, the highland is rugged mountains and rugged terrains and huge forests. So the contexts were very isolated for many, many years. Only the coastal areas, because of some trading influence between Indonesia and, of course, Asian influence coming in through the coastal areas, but within the mountains, very, very distinct and very isolated. And trying to build infrastructure through there with very limited resource and budget is quite challenging. So, when we were in government, we've been trying our very best to access some of these communities. And some communities may be 500 people, probably 1,000 people, but they still deserve our attention. They need their kids to go to school, the children to go to school. They need health services. They need infrastructure to serve them as well. So these are the sort of countries that, David and I sort of have a first-hand experience of being in the country, so we take it for granted. But it is for any new visitor coming into PNG, it's quite a delightful experience. And on terms of environment, it's very pristine. The ocean is completely blue, and of course, heavily forested island, and some of the untouched beaches. And in some islands, there would be no human beings living on it, so you can be the only person on the island. So it's quite a beautiful country, and many Chinese who go to Papua New Guinea, let me tell you this, many Chinese, we've got probably over, I would say 30 or 40,000 Chinese who live and work and do business there. And as I said earlier, they're into their third or fourth generation. Many Chinese who go there never come back to China. They'll come and visit China only. And when they come to China, they all want to go back to PNG because the country, less population, more resources, better opportunities. So you can see a lot of Chinese who go there, they do very well because they are hardworking people. And unfortunately for my side of the population in PNG and the Pacific, we take life for granted. So we are a little bit slow in doing things. They're relaxed in life. That's what we can say, relaxed in life. So, of course, the hardworking people do well in our country. So that's the sort of country David is referring to.
So there's a reason why the national bird is called the bird of paradise, because we've just heard from Peter O'Neill about how really parts of Papua New Guinea are paradise, quite natural and pristine and pure wilderness. But of course, there are huge challenges for the people of Papua New Guinea. And we heard about the rapidly growing population. I mean, I can remember, it seems like yesterday that Papua New Guinea had 9 million people. It wasn't that many years ago. And now to hear of 17 million, this is both an opportunity and a challenge, right? Because of course it's a huge challenge to have such a rapidly growing population and such a young population with the processes of development, with the wealthy energy and resources sector, and then the lack of wealth in other parts of the community. But equally, it's a huge opportunity if you have such a young population and a rapidly growing population. This is a real opportunity for economic growth. So how to capture that opportunity? What are the industries where there's real potential for Papua New Guinea in the decades ahead?
Well, Papua New Guinea has got, as I said, a population of close to less than 60%, probably 55% of our population is under 25 years of age. And because until about 2011-12, when we took government, I introduced free education and free healthcare policy in the country. So we were able to migrate a few of them into better schools and getting literacy opportunities, learning how to read and write. Unfortunately, the new government under the new prime minister has not been able to continue that program. He wanted to change the policy for better or worse to suit his own stamp on the education system in the country. And unfortunately, that meant that it had displaced many of the young people from the schools because the parents were unable to pay for the school fees. It canceled the free education policy. Now, the biggest opportunity is for these young people is to skill them so they can be able to either get a meaningful employment, get into business, or have the skills to look after themselves. And that's where the great opportunity is, where the industries like resource developments, oil and gas, mining, all those require large numbers of skilled workers. And of course, in agriculture, we have one of the most fertile soils in globally, I would say, because it's all volcanic soil and it's very fertile. You don't need fertilizers to really grow anything in the country, and the yields and some of the production is much higher. But it's all in the very rugged mountains, so getting access and infrastructure to that kind of land is also the challenge that we are facing. So the opportunities for young people are in all these industries that can be set up, and to do that you need foreign direct investment. And of course, the Chinese are starting to lift their involvement in the country, and more larger mining and oil companies are coming to invest in PNG. In fact, some of our oil and gas are being exported to China. We know the resources that China need. So there is a good economic partnership that is going on. All we need to do is now work together to make sure that we lift the social standing of our communities and make sure that our people have got the skills, educated, and healthy to be productive citizens of our country. And I think with that, you will have a smaller version of China in the Pacific quite easily, because it has got the resources to back its opportunities and ambitions that it has for the country ahead of, for the people ahead of us. So yeah, David, that's where the opportunities are.
And you mentioned the inspirational model of China and the development of China in the last 40 or so years that demonstrates what can be done with strategy and with investment in education, as you say, and infrastructure and integration into global markets, all of those things that Papua New Guinea needs. So China as a partner for Papua New Guinea, obviously a very important economic partner. And so how do you see the Belt and Road Initiative cooperation over the long term? What are the real opportunities there for both countries from cooperating, from building that infrastructure and from developing the new industries? What do you see as the opportunities there?
Papua New Guinea was one of the first countries that signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative. And as part of that program, we have been able to access finance in China. We've been able to have access to very concessional finances through Exim Bank and of all the other commercial banks within China, who have invested heavily into the infrastructure in our country. So it has enabled us to build universities and hospitals and schools at high schools down to at primary level right across the country. We've been able to build ports and airports, roads right across the country, and it has certainly opened up the country in a very visible manner. And I think if someone who has visited our country, say 15 years ago, would notice the changes that is taking place. And you will see that that is also happening not only in Papua New Guinea, but right across the Pacific. You go to the small island countries, most of the infrastructure, including the main roads and stadiums and hospitals, are built by the Chinese initiative that is being initiated by President Xi Jinping. And it is of great benefit. And I think, if those initiatives are no longer available to these countries, the countries will fall back. And largely because the population is increasing. So we have to keep up the investment in these sectors as we go along. And there's a great opportunity for both China and PNG and the Pacific island nations.
We talked about the diversity of Papua New Guinea. I want to ask you about the Pacific Islands region as a whole, because we have had this discussion in the Pacific for a long time, actually, about how does our regionalism develop? How do we work as brothers, if you like, as a family in the region? And in particular, in the time that I worked for the Pacific Islands Forum here in Beijing a few years ago, under the leadership in those days of Dame Meg Taylor, a very distinguished and famous Papua New Guinean, the Pacific Islands Forum leaders went through the process of developing this Blue Pacific vision, an idea about this, identifying the Pacific as not small island states, but actually as large ocean states, because actually the region of the Pacific is a major region of the world. It's a major region of the world for resources, for fisheries, and for energy. How do you think that's going, Peter? And as someone who's led the largest Pacific Island country, what are your thoughts about the future of regionalism, and how does the Pacific Islands region as a whole, what does it mean for development, for the economic development of the region?
Our aim in the Pacific has always been to try and keep the Pacific pristine and accessible by everyone, rather than trying to narrow it down to few individuals or few companies or few countries. And by the agreements that we have signed along the 14 or 15 countries along the Pacific, has always been cooperative and consistent. And as I said earlier, the geopolitics is now starting to put some sort of cloud around some of the agreements that we have had. One of them is the recent defense cooperation agreement that Papua New Guinea signed with the United States. And I've been the biggest critic of that, because I think it undermines the Papua New Guinea's country's constitution. No country in the world wants the constitution and the laws of their country to be undermined. No country in the world. And if you want to change any laws or constitution, you have to go back to the people. Let the people make that decision through their elected representative. And we have been a signatory to the Nuclear-Free Pacific from Rarotonga for many, many years. Now, giving access to this kind of agreements allows that to be breached. So, you can have nuclear ships and aircrafts that carry nuclear warheads to visit the Pacific quite freely now. So some of the initiatives that we have taken is to try and keep Pacific safe, Pacific free of any of these confrontations. And we've had some very bad experience, I think, before the Second World War, where some smaller countries like Marshall Island and as such has been countries of where nuclear testing has taken place and destroyed the pristine environment. So we have got some experience around this. So we don't want similar things happening in our countries. So that has been the main driving force behind the sort of general agreement that we all have taken in. So there is a huge concern among communities with some of the recent developments taking place in the Pacific. Second issue is it's a big ocean, and fisheries has been unregulated for a while. We have got some of the largest fishery stock in the world, particularly tuna. And this unregulated fishing has caused us a lot of problems. And that's coming from some of our friends in Taiwan and Japan and a few other places who are just going in and fishing in some of the economic zones, EEZ of each of our countries, and that is causing concern. So I think the greater role that some of our bigger economic based countries in the region who can regulate this better come and help us sort of manage it, so we can sustain the fisheries for the future generation. We need to make it available for the future. We shouldn't be depleting it such that they become extinct and nobody else can have tuna in the future. So I think the Pacific is now under a situation where there's a lot of uncertainties. When you go to some of the countries that are now been changes of government, you'll see many of the countries have changed governments over. But this has raised concern among the population now because there's now lack of consistency in the policies within the countries. And hopefully our leaders can take stock of what's the thinking of their people and the expectations of their people before they make policy changes that are detrimental to our countries and our people.
You've talked about the very practical question of fisheries management and how sustainability of fisheries is absolutely essential to economies such as Papua New Guinea. I want to ask you about sustainability in general, because the climate crisis that we're now facing that is getting worse every year, and we seem to be on track not to meet the United Nations goals for 2030. We seem to be heading towards 3% rise in the temperature, global temperature, by the end of the century, which could be catastrophic for the Pacific. What has been the position of Papua New Guinea, and is it a consensus position in the Pacific around what we need to do as a global community in relation to climate change? And what's your personal view on how do we grapple with this challenge to all of us?
Yeah, climate change is a very big issue for the Pacific Island countries as rising sea levels continue to displace communities. Many of the islands are not, I think, higher than 1 meter in some places. So the rising sea levels is now going into their houses and displacing the communities at very low level line islands run each of those countries. Firstly, the migration of those people is to higher safety and safer grounds is a big issue because some of the larger countries are not willing to take those migrants into their countries. And secondly, the efforts. I've attended a few of those COP meetings during my time, and quite frankly, I think everybody's talking and making big announcements, but there is no real effort in addressing the climate change challenge, climate challenges that we have in the world today. And at the most at risk are the poorest countries and the countries the smallest countries, countries with especially at the low line levels of at sea levels. So we are encouraged by China's stance in this issue and the commitments that China has made, and in fact over the last few years I've been coming back to China, visiting China, and I see more electric cars on the road, which is a big effort in itself, and trying to address these issues for us, and the real meaningful efforts that China has put in is commendable, and we hope that we can do more partnerships in the region, especially in protection of some of the low line. Papua New Guinea is okay. We've got many mountains, so we can all migrate up there. It's not, but we're worried about many of our brothers in the Pacific.
Now we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. So who has a question for Peter O'Neill? Yes, please go first. Do we have a microphone? Thank you.
So my question is, you mentioned that Papua New Guinea was dragged to the geopolitical confrontations. So as we noticed that in May, that Papua New Guinea signed the defense cooperation with the United States, basically which allows the military have access to the ports and military facilities. So do you think that agreement will trigger the regional rivalries and provoke the regional confrontations? And do you think that will accelerate the political divisions among all the South Pacific Island countries? That's my first question.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very, very important question, and I take note that the seriousness of the implications of this signing of this agreement will have on the region itself. And in our government in Papua New Guinea has signed this agreement without really against the wishes of the people. There's been a huge debate around this issue during the conversations that we've had. And I think, President Biden was supposed to visit Papua New Guinea, and because of the sort of debates that were taking place in Papua New Guinea, President Biden had some other issues in Washington, so he decided to stay back. But we think that our debates cost him to stay back, but that's a different issue. But I take it, as I said, firstly, because our laws has been breached. Two, our commitments in the Pacific through nuclear-free zone in the Pacific has been breached, so I take issue with that. And the third thing is that Papua New Guinea participated in the Second World War in 1942 to 45, not because we were at conflict with anybody, but they entered our country, dragged us into war with Japan and, of course, the Allies. And after the war, everybody disappeared. And we had to live on our own for almost 80 years. So as soon as some issue within the region comes up, coming back after 80 years of absence, it's a little bit concerning for me. If you're a friend of Papua New Guinea and our people, you should be there helping us to rebuild our lives after the conflicts that has taken place. So, these are humanly things to do. It's not something that's because of geopolitics or but it's a humanly thing to do. You've been hosted, you've come and caused some damage in our country. You should try and help us rebuild our lives and move on. So, we see that the interest about having this kind of arrangement with Papua New Guinea is not genuine. And I'm on public record in Parliament saying this. So it's not something that I've shied away from because, I need to be, I stand to be corrected that this will be of some benefit to my country. As far as I can see, there's no benefit to having such an agreement. I prefer to have a trade and investment arrangement. I prefer to have a people-to-people understanding with all of our countries within the region. We are a member of the APEC, only country apart from New Zealand and Australia to be a member of APEC, which is a very great initiative. And these are sort of organizations that should be building trade and investments within the region to lift the standard of living and of our people and trying to improve the economic situation of each of the countries within the region. So I am not in agreement with this kind of agreements that Papua New Guinea signed.
Yeah, I have one more question.
One more, okay, just briefly.
Yeah, it will pretty brief. So United States and the allies are continuously expanding their presence in South Island country. And a lot of reports are saying that they are aiming to counterattack China's cooperation with South Island country. So what's your takes on that?
Well, I hope it doesn't escalate. That's my first view. It doesn't. Any conflict as such doesn't help anybody. It only causes more problems for everyone. There's never winners in this situation. So I'm hoping that common sense will prevail. Papua New Guinea's agreement with the United States or any other country is not written in stone. Our country's governments change. Governments change every 3 or 4 years or 5 years. So all these agreements are always under review. So I think the opposition in Papua New Guinea is taking the matter. Our judiciary is very independent. As I said, it undermines our constitution. So we will ask the judiciary to review the agreement. We've had similar agreement with Australia before. And the opposition parties took it to court. And it was thrown out that this agreement was illegal. So it was never enforced. My belief is that the same will happen with the agreement that Papua New Guinea has signed. So those steps are being taken as we speak.
Do we have a second question? Yes.
Yes. Hello, my name is Mahmood. I'm an intern at CCG. I'm from Pakistan. I study in Tsinghua University here. I study politics and international relations. One of the things that I focus on is countries in the global south and their political systems. And why is it that their current political systems act as a hindrance for them to achieve development goals? And so that's why my question to you would be that do you think that the norm of the world, the democratic parliamentary systems, particularly for developing countries, are a hindrance in achieving? You talked about how China has lifted about 300 to 400 million people from low to middle income group, and many scholars might say that China has a unique political advantage due to which it's able to do this miracle, so to speak. And so do you think for developing countries, they must tweak their political systems to have practical outcomes, or you think it's possible that these current systems can deliver these aspirations as well?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question because human history teaches us a lot of lessons. Over thousands of years, rulers have come and gone over time. And some have done well, some have not done well under different political systems. So firstly, you can say that one system doesn't fit everybody. But I think as leaders who have been given this unique responsibility by our people to us as leaders, it's how we manage ourselves and how we manage it to the interest and for our people in our country. I think that will firstly be by individual persons' own responsibilities and on principles that he stands for. As for many of our developing countries, where we see is that there's a constant change of governments. Before my predecessor came to government, Somalia, our country and governments change every 18 months. So how can you have consistency in policies that are going to be beneficial to the people? Then my predecessors was in government for 9 years, and I took over when I was in government for 8 years. Because I was a member of that 9-year government before, I was able to continue some of the good policies and improve on some of the others that were weak. So we were within that 17 or 18 years, we were able to achieve the development aspirations that our country needed. But unfortunately, when the new lot came in, they did not have similar goals. They had very radical ideas. And as a result, our country continues to suffer today. Last 4 years, there's been not one single direct foreign investment in the country. Now, that goes into resolving issues about how that creates lack of opportunities for our people and our youth. So, governments, I see the challenges in Pakistan and India and everywhere else that we all practice this Westminster democratic style of government. There are advantages and there are disadvantages because sometimes unchecked leadership can also bring about a lot of problems. You see that in Africa, many of the African countries. You have had governments that remain for a long time, but China is a very unique country. Their political system does not interfere too much in changing the policies of that will benefit the people. You can see the consistency in and improving of the policies that they have, and as a result, they've been able to achieve the miracles that they have done. I mean, you compare that to India, for instance, similar-sized country, similar population. The government in India is quite stable, but are they not able to advance some of the issues the social issues, technology and all the other infrastructure and things are, of course, being developed at the pace that's serving the people. But in terms of lifting the standard of living for that population is not there. So, it is a challenge. And, some countries, like in our country now, people want to go into voting for the president or the prime minister by the people rather than the parliament voted him. So those options have been looked at the moment. So we'll see whether it works or not. We might then decide to go back to electing the prime minister by members of parliament. So you never know.
That's an interesting question, that one, isn't it? We have time for one last question. Yes.
And I work here as a full-time research fellow. It's a great privilege to have you here, Your Excellency. I was wondering, following on Mahmoud's question, China says it has a non-interference foreign policy and it doesn't export its political system or, impose its system or wills on other countries. While at the same time, there is always this sort of concerns from the Western world that, being too close to China or cooperating on certain matters would, lead to Chinese infiltration or influence in the southern countries. I think there are some concerns with regard to the Pacific Island countries. So how would you respond to that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think those kind of statements are misplaced. Misplaced because I've been in government and in parliament for over close to 25 years now. I've dealt with many Chinese officials, and I've never had one Chinese official suggesting or interfering or asking. Everything has been very cooperative. So in my experience, I have not seen that in the Pacific. But of course, because of a greater involvement of China in many of our small islands, it's visible of the infrastructure that they build and the engagements and the businesses that they're starting. It's very visible, so people feel a little bit concerned about that. But in terms of imposing political will and imposing their national interest in terms of towards another sovereign nation, I've not cited any of that experience during my time, and I believe that Chinese policy is very much a win-win situation for both China and the host country, or a country that they are doing business with, or in terms of being a development partner. So I think those concerns are a bit misplaced, I think.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much, Peter O'Neill. It's been such a fascinating discussion, hasn't it? We've covered so many issues of relevance to the developing world, issues of real relevance to China and to Papua New Guinea, and actually across the developing world. It's just been a fascinating discussion. I want to thank the audience, and I want to thank my colleagues at CCG for organising this today. But most of all, I'd like to ask everyone to join me, please, in thanking Peter O'Neill.